Well, good morning, everyone. Just waiting for Martin to come back and for people to join today. So I hope you're all well, and I hope you're having a good week as well, making progress. So we'll just wait for a minute just for people to join us. Okay. Okay. So I'll first of all say welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar. And my name is Tim Kellett and I'm from Paydata. And we have a 1 hour webinar today. The slides we will send out afterwards, so you don't have to make too many copious notes. Just a little bit of background for those who don't know Paydata. First of all, we are a reward management specialist. We help organizations find, attract and retain and motivate and engage their people with the right skills. And we have a range of services and support we provide to organizations. Obviously the clues in the name, Paydata. We do a lot of benchmarking, but we provide a lot of business insights and these sorts of webinars, do things like equal pay audits, total reward statements, help people with pay structures, particularly popular at the moment with the state of the external labour market. Help people with think about their overall approach to reward. So that's the sort of reward strategy. We have our own job evaluation system as well. And I think the main thing, you can see it in the corner there, is it's making our customers and our own people's lives better at work. So that's our mantra as such. So that's a little bit about Paydata. Today, I'm delighted to that we've got Martin Chitty, who's a senior partner and specialist in employment law at Gowling's solicitors. So welcome today, Martin. I'm really looking forward to hearing your expertise on the subject of legal and organizational issues around hybrid working. And this is a subject which has come up a lot in our HR workshops since the start of the pandemic, actually, but definitely as we move through, hopefully to the back end of the pandemic, people have been looking around at this sort of issue. And I think today will be very useful to sort of help answer some of those questions. So welcome, Martin. And I will now hand over to you to talk about this very subject. So thank you, Martin.
Tim, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me along today. If I just tell you a bit about myself. So as Tim said, I'm a specialist employment lawyer. I've been doing this actually for longer than I care to remember, but let's say 35 years, which is probably kind to me and unkind to the rest of you. Gowling, some of you won't recognize the name. Gowling, we're what used to be Rag & Co. We're now part of an Anglo-Canadian firm with offices, well, obviously across Canada, here in the UK, across Western Europe, the Far East, and in the Middle East as well. And it's a very interesting and exciting time to be working in labour, employment and equalities law, which is how we badge the work that we do. So enough of that. I won't mention too obviously the logo in the top left-hand corner of the screen, which confirms that we are in fact official legal advisors to Birmingham 2022. So actually we are very excited about that and about the fact that Birmingham, where I live, is the host city for the 2022 Commonwealth Games. And we also advise Team England, which is the competitor side of the English team structure. But enough of that. Let me talk about what I'm going to talk about this morning. And this is where I find that I haven't pressed the right button. And there we are, Tim. Thank you very much. That's a brilliant save on your part. 2 years ago, almost exactly to the day, I came back from holiday. I'd been fortunate to go to Canada. And it turned out, little did we know it at the time, that we got the last aeroplane out of Vancouver Airport before they shut it. We'd been away skiing, which was very nice. And it was all blissfully unaware of the impending COVID pandemic. And I came back to work to find that my team was one that was testing whether our remote access systems would actually stand up to large numbers of us working at home. And that was on the Monday. And then on the Wednesday, we went to home working. That was in the middle of March, as I say, almost exactly 2 years ago. And 18 months later, I went back to the office for the first time. And I don't suppose, in fact, I know that sitting on that plane coming back from Canada, I wasn't thinking very much about remote working. In fact, I wasn't thinking about very much at all. Certainly wasn't thinking about changes in the labour market structure and hybrid working. So we've come a long way. And I think we've all had some difficult and very mixed experiences in that. That said, I do think that whole period in lots of ways has been very positive. Positive in the sense of we have moved quickly because necessity prompts greater speed of change and development. So we knew that we had the tech previously to go for a hybrid remote working model, but there wasn't the impetus or the need to do it. And then there was, and by and large, it's not perfect, but it works more often than it's not. And I'm sure many of you will have heard stories, experienced yourself, seen articles about the fact that during that period of home working, productivity increased. We saw that. I mean, whether it's true productivity, I think is open to argument, but I'll leave that to the economist and the accountants. People were certainly working longer hours. And in our business, where we charge on the basis of time, people were working longer hours. Now, that of itself is a thing. It is not necessarily a good thing, and it may not be the same as increased productivity, but things have changed and it has worked. And one of the things that we've seen is that the naysayers, if you like, those of our colleagues who are a bit sort of backwards about this, can't now argue that remote working doesn't work. It's worked very effectively in lots of ways, but as I say, it's imperfect. So what I'm going to talk about is, so what does this hybrid model, the new normal, if that's the case, and I do think that's a question we can legitimately ask still, whether that, what are the legal and organizational issues that we need to be thinking about, both you and we from that point of view. And I'm going to divide it into two parts fairly obviously. One is the legal part. That's the part I do know about, I do understand, and I have some expertise in. And then there's the organizational part where I profess little or no expertise other than the fact we employ 1,300 people. We do operate a 50-50% hybrid model. We have the advantage of being a white collar business, so we don't have people who need to be on the shop floor bolting things together or building things, constructing things. But there are organizational issues, and these I've picked up along the way. Some of them are based on direct client experience and our own experience as an employer, and some are based on things I've read. Now, were we all in a room together, which we're not, at this point I'd be asking for a show of hands. We can't do that, so hopefully tech permitting. We're going to do a few quick poll questions with you all. So in a moment, you'll have an opportunity to vote on, I think there's 5 different questions we're going to do. And each of them is just to sort of gain an impression for everybody, and we'll talk about the results, on what's happened over the last 2 years, what's happening at the moment, how you see things developing. So the first of these questions, and it may be that this is irrelevant to you, and this relates to lockdown version 1, if you like, is how well did your business cope with home working version 1? This was when lots of people had to work from home because we were told that that's what they got to do. And there are 4 options here. The first of them, it went extremely well and it was pretty seamless. The second one is that it went quite well. We pulled together and we made the best of it, frankly. The third one, we just about made it out alive at the other side. And the fourth one is it was an absolute disaster. So if you'd like to poll, exercise the option to poll on whichever of those best reflects how your business went through that period, that would be great. And we will be able to look at the poll results in a moment.
See, hopefully people can see it. I've launched the poll now. Oh, here we go. Got some people filling it in.
Some people have gone on to question 2, which is very ambitious. Sounds a bit like my approach to my O levels. I don't like the first question. I'll do the second one instead. Right. So I think, we can see the results there. That's very positive, I would say. Extremely well, pretty seamless, running at about 46%. This is like election night. Quite well, and we pulled together and we made the best of it around 60%, so a 60-40 split. Now that, I would say, is reflective of the experience of most of my clients, and indeed reflective of the sort of feedback I've seen in independent surveys. There was a survey published in the Times about 10 days ago of 1,200 employers, and their results reflect all of your experience. Now, there might be reasons for that, which we'll come on to later, but one of them may be that it was of necessity. Actually, there's 2 on. This sounds like the lead into a very poor Monty Python sketch. But there are 2 reasons for that. One is that it's in extremis and you had to deal with it. And the other is that for some of you, not all, I appreciate, everybody was in the same boat and everybody was having to cope with the same situation. And that may not be the same when we look at hybrid working. So the second question, which many of you have already done, have you introduced hybrid working? And 77% of you have. And again, that's a slightly higher percentage than I would have expected. We could, if we were in the room, talk then about whether that's across the whole business or only across parts of the business. Because one of the issues we will talk about later on, and I think does cause problems organisationally, is that it's not necessarily possible for everybody in an organisation to work on a remote or hybrid basis. And that can present problems in terms of workforce cohesion and such like. So if we go on to question 3, question 3 is hybrid working easier or more difficult to manage than all at home stroke in the office? That's great. So obviously some of you are not operating a hybrid model, so it's not applicable to you. And again, that's quite divided. I think you're doing better than many in that case, if those results are reflective. The external results I've seen switch the balance slightly the other way around, that it's a 60-40 split. That certainly was the basis of the results I've seen from the Times. It is more difficult to manage people when they're not all doing the same thing, or not everybody's doing the same thing all of the time. It requires more effort simply because of the lack of cohesion in certain respects. Certainly from our point of view, our team's not huge, there's about 20 of us, and we're working on a 50-50 model, and we have 1 anchor day in the week when we expect everybody to be in. But the rest of the time, we go from having most people in, normally on a Tuesday as well as a Thursday, and indeed, we find that we have nobody in at all on Mondays and Fridays. I think that's probably predictable, but occasionally people will go in and think, oh, it would be good if I could talk to X, only to find that X is not there. So they just end up talking to them on Zoom, which is what we've been doing very happily for the last couple of years. Now, the 4th question is, how far along the journey are you in embedding hybrid working to balance business, customer, and employee needs? Now, it's slightly different, isn't it? A bit more of a range. So about 25% of you are progressing very well. We're achieving a great balance. We're making some progress, but there's more to do. Progress has been and will be slow. And then some of you have stalled and given up. So I take from that nobody who's started on the hybrid model has packed it in as being unworkable. Interestingly, 1 or 2 businesses, particularly in tech, went very big very quickly on going to full home working and have now backed away from that quite significantly. One of them, no names mentioned, has hit a problem because they also got rid of all their offices and now find they have no offices to put their people in and having to acquire premises again. That's been quite awkward for them. And that's also, I think, a reflection of the way in which they work. But a lot of positives. I'd expect people to say, well, there's more to do, frankly. So 50% of you are where I expect you to be. And equally, I think some businesses have adapted very well. It's merely made formal, if you like, what lots of businesses were looking to do and doing in part anyway. And then for others, it's a bit more of a struggle because the hybrid model doesn't really work necessarily uniformly for everyone. I'm a school governor outside of work, and understandably but unavoidably, the teaching staff at my school are a bit miffed that they can't work from home. They see all their mates being offered the opportunity to work from home in other professions, and they can't because the kids are in school and teaching remotely obviously isn't a deliverable. Yet when the lockdown was at its height and parts of school were closed and lessons were being done remotely, they could do that. And now they've had that taken away from them, if they like, so they feel somehow let down that we can't do better for them. Okay, let's move on to this last question. How many of you, and this is the answers on a postcard in a sealed envelope question, how many of you would secretly prefer to have office only working as the model and put the genie back in the bottle? To the possibly one or two people who've said yes, please, I admire your candor and honesty. Thank you for that. A few of you, yes, I would, but the tide's against us, so we have no choice and we're going to put up with it. And this is interesting. We've done this a few times in different contexts. Actually, the bottom one, no, we embrace the change and the shift in our staff expectations, and we are going for it. Now, what we don't have an opportunity to do here today is to debate, discuss, compare and contrast how that works for all of you, and whether that's you're just meeting staff expectations, or really this is a new working model which has got a big upside for everybody. I know talking to our staff, not necessarily a representative cross-section, what we have been able to do and what we've done is that we've let lawyers and support staff work remotely, which we didn't do before. There was very much a view that it was all right for the lawyers to work at home, but PAs couldn't. Now we know that that's not true, and it's very deliverable. The same for our finance, IT, business development, marketing people as well. So we've gone with it from that point of view. And I think there is a massive expectation, I'll come on to this in another context later, about staff expectations and the need for organisations to adapt their thinking to reflect that. It's not the only area in which this is true by any manner of means, but that's one of the organisational points I'm going to come on to. So Tim, if we can drop that. Oh wait, oh, I can do it. Oh, that's good. So as I say, I'm going to split this into two parts, some legal issues first and some organisational issues afterwards. There we go. Right, so on the legal side, I mean, some of this you will know, you will understand, you'll have come across already. My basic premise on the legal issues is that actually hybrid working is not new. The law is not different. It's just the application and the context which you need to think about. So like any other position, my starting point is, where are we and what have you done so far in terms of either hybrid working or home working? Now, at the height of the pandemic, we were told by and large, if you can, you must work at home. So that's what we all did. And most clients will have put in place something around that, possibly. Many I know didn't. Furlough was a different issue. They had to put in some quite complex arrangements. But from the point of view of working from home, everybody just went from working in the office to working at home, and we all sort of found our way through. But it's, sorry, if we just go back one, Tim. So, is it stored up changes? I think it has. Okay. So from the legal point of view, where are we now? Have we done anything which indicates that we're making hybrid permanent as a proposal, or have we done anything that prevents that? So it's a matter of, as with any contract, and employment is a contract after all, where are we? What are the legal obligations that we've imposed on ourselves? I doubt that any of you will have put in a formalized permanent hybrid structure, simply because you've burned your bridges at that point, because if it doesn't work, you've then got to unpick it. But if you have, quite happy to talk about that at some time. Most organizations that I've come across, and the line we've advocated with clients, is we're doing this on a temporary basis to see how it works, to see whether it works, and then we can refine it as we go along. So as I mentioned before, this is a personal experience. We have our team in, everybody's in on a Thursday, and we're reviewing changing that because we're not sure it's enough. There are too few days when there's a critical mass of people present. And developmentally, from our lawyers' point of view, it's fine for people like me. I've been doing this a long time. I've got the space at home to work. I've got no kids living here. That's easy. For some of our junior lawyers, they're living in one step up from student accommodation. So having them in the office, in fact, we let them work in the office all the time if they want to, but having more direct contact, so they're learning at people's knee, it's a very old-fashioned term, I know, but it's still true, is something that we want them to do. So we'll probably move to having them in 2 days a week. The second issue then is whether what you've put in place is a temporary or permanent arrangement. And it's like any flexible working arrangement, it doesn't have to be final and of infinite duration. So most people have put this in on a temporary basis. And if you're looking at progressing the development of your model, then I would suggest that that's what you should do going forward. Perhaps to be reviewed every 3 months as an absolute minimum. 6 months, I think, is more realistic. You know, we've been back in the office since about September, so 6 months, but we've also had another period of home working in that. So just as we were all getting used to this new world, we went back to home working again, and it's only since Christmas we've resumed hybrid working, and I think we're just letting it settle down. So I'd build in some review period from a contractual point of view if you're doing that. One of the points, if you like, which is it's not new, it's old law, is that we have to see hybrid working both as a variation of any pre-existing contract. It's also something you can't necessarily impose on people. Now, if Tim comes to me and says, Martin, you're going onto a hybrid model, I'm absolutely entitled to say I'm not. I'm coming in every day. That's what I want to do. That's what my contract actually requires me to do. And you can't impose a variation on me in that way. Let's reverse that discussion. And Tim says, right, we're going on to a hybrid model here, and it's on average 2.5 days in, 2.5 days out, or 5 days every fortnight, however you want to describe that. And I say, that doesn't suit me. I know I said before that I wanted to be in the office all the time, but actually now I want to be at home all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a flexible working request. I have a statutory right to do that. You have a statutory obligation then to consider it, albeit slowly over 3 months. And most employers will find a reason why they can decline a flexible working request if they really push for it. But actually, that's increasingly difficult, particularly where you've had lots of people working remotely, and it's been effective. And I've been brilliant working from home. I really, really have. I've done a fantastic job, productivity through the roof. All my timetables and targets have been hit. So I can turn around and say, well, on what basis can you legitimately say that this is not tolerable? Because I've done a brilliant job. And then we come back to this question about it being easier if everybody's working remotely because we're all in the same boat. And actually, me working remotely when everybody else is working in the office some of the time may not be a tolerable situation. There may be lots of very good organizational reasons which justify the legal rationale that you need to meet to decline a flexible working request. But do remember that flexible working requests, although gender neutral these days, and the legislation is drafted that way, you don't have to identify why it is you want to make the flexible working request. It's just a request. A much higher proportion of women work flexibly than do men. So you've still got to consider whether there are issues around that in relation to some aspect of discrimination. And that's an issue which actually is probably the biggest risk issue in all of this, is the risk of discrimination at some point. Whether it's in relation to the way in which you deal with flexible working requests, if that's the way that people do it, my apologies for that, or whether there's an element of subconscious bias at work, that the way in which you react is influenced by some element of bias on your part. I think there is a risk if there's a disproportionate number of people working in the office as against working on a hybrid model, that we'll see issues around presenteeism, which tends to be more of a, frankly, a male trait than a female trait, because women, again, gross generalization, have more caring obligations in the home and have less flexibility about their working hours. And there's also the big question of work being allocated to those people who are in plain sight. And that's a classic basis for a discrimination claim. So you do have to be mindful of all of those issues. A more mundane point than that is that if we're going to vary someone's contract from 9 till 5 in the office, let's be very clear about what those new contractual terms are going to be. You know, what are the working times and hours? Which days? As fundamental as that, is hybridization going to be Mondays to Fridays, or are we going to look at a working week where people are working actually Wednesday till Sunday? In most places that won't happen, plainly it won't, because that's not how other parts of the business and or the external customer base work. But clarity is vitally important. That's why we have, being very boring about it, Section 1 statements and contracts. An employment contract requires clarity. So do think about that, because people need to understand on both sides, the individual, the employer, and colleagues, when people are meant to be working, when they're not meant to be working. And that also applies in terms of where they work and what delivery looks like. Because the place of work, people assume hybrid working means working from home. Well, I might be working in Starbucks or somewhere else. I might be working in the gym. Yeah, I might choose to sit in there, rather sadly, and do all my work from there. And then that gives rise to questions about security, confidentiality, all those sorts of things. So all of these things are relevant, and they're the sort of mundane things which, going forward, we haven't seen cases on this yet, will trip us up if we're not careful. In the same context, it's a natural progression onto the question of monitoring. Now, monitoring is a vexed topic at the best of times, but monitoring is legitimate. There are reasons why you can justify it. The law allows for it. You almost certainly do it at the moment in some context. I'm sure you can tell, I'm sure Tim could tell when I logged on in the morning. He might even tell what I'm doing. He can probably see which documents I've accessed. He may have created a situation in which I've got no expectation as to a right of privacy. If you have security passes in your office, you can tell when I come in and go out. You can't tell what I'm doing in that period necessarily, or indeed whether I'm doing anything at all, but there is monitoring. So it is legitimate to monitor, and indeed, provided you take the right steps in advance, you can do that. The point I would raise, I suppose, is this. A lot of the aversion to remote working historically in lots of organizations, including mine, was a matter of trust. Yeah, if I can't see you, how do I know you're working? Well, if people have been working remotely for the last 18 months or 2 years, and time in my business has gone on the clock, or projects have been progressed, projects have been managed, developments have been completed, people were plainly working. Maybe this is a sign that we're moving to a more trusting relationship. It's less Victorian mill owner who measures things by input and attendance and more to output. Does it matter when and where I work, provided the work gets done? And this may be, and I was talking earlier about the acceleration in the rate of change in workplace attitudes, and this may be one of those attitudes. Now, my slightly sort of recidivist backwoodsman colleagues who were distrustful of working remotely cannot now sensibly argue that it doesn't work or that it's not deliverable. It may be that working in the office is better, but it's not that one is infinitely better, logarithmically better than the other. 3 other points just to mention before we move on. In work, wherever the workplace is, you know about health and safety and workplace assessments, etc. If someone's working at home, those obligations still exist. It's not you're released from those obligations. In fact, quite the opposite. They carry on. So you need to make sure that if people are working at home, you've carried out a workplace assessment. And I'm not a health and safety lawyer, so this is by way of paraphrase. But you need to carry out a workplace assessment. I'm sitting here talking to you. I've got my laptop up. I've got 2 screens. That's basically the setup I have in the office, which is very fortunate. I think organizations do need to look at that. I know, talking to my colleagues who deal with health and safety, there's an expectation of a vast increase in the number of neck and shoulder related claims from people crouching over their laptops balanced on their knees from working at home. So all of those issues still apply, as well as the issues around confidentiality, security of information, etc. Now, for some organisations, and this may apply to some of you, and it may not, we've had a few people who decided to relocate during the lockdown. They didn't necessarily tell us that. The furthest one we had was from London to Uzbekistan, because one of our staff who's from there decided to go home during the lockdown to be with his parents. Perfectly legitimate rationale. It would have helped if he'd told us he's now back in London. That created a problem from our point of view in terms of the risk of creating a permanent establishment in another country. Other people went and worked at their holiday homes in Portugal. One emigrated back to Canada, and quite a few people decided to relocate in the UK to more attractive places than London, because it was cheaper to live and nicer. So there is an issue brewing in the market generally. Some of you will have seen this, about remuneration versus location. Are you going to pay London rate if I move to Cornwall or Norfolk or Northumberland, where the latter certainly would be less expensive place to live? What we have seen, I don't know whether you've experienced this, is firms in London, law firms in London, poaching our people by offering them London rates, but saying you only need to come in the office once a month and you can stay living in leafy Warwickshire or North Birmingham, wherever it happens to be. Or they're offering a slight discount on London rate, and the difference in the labour market in our sector between London and not London is enormous. So there are issues there. Are you looking at the converse of that? If people move away, are you going to say, well, if you want to work remotely all the time and we know you're moving to Northumberland, we're going to pay you at a local labour market rate? Or are you going to have to come to some sort of compromise? And then there's a knock-on issue, of course, which is organisational, about how much space do you need where you are at the moment. And I think a lot of organisations initially were talking about downsizing their office space quickly. I don't see that happening. My colleagues in real estate say we were looking at that as a very likely prospect 12 months ago as things were starting to open up. That doesn't seem to be happening so quickly, but lots of businesses are running with excess space, because on any given day, as an example, we have yet to have a day since September where more than 40% of our staff are in the office. That tends to be a Thursday, because lots of teams have their anchor days on Thursday. Mondays and Fridays, as I say, it's a wasteland, as is, generally speaking, Wednesday. So there we are. Now, the last part, I mentioned this just in passing. It may or may not be a live risk for all of you. If you let people work remotely, super remotely, there are going to be issues about tax, their tax, where they should be paying tax and social security. There may be a risk of you having inadvertently acquired a permanent establishment in a third country or a second country, which leads to corporation tax issues. And there are also issues about if people are working, particularly in other EU countries where we wouldn't have batted an eyelid a couple of years ago, they're now working in a country and they may need a visa, or they may not. I'm not an immigration expert and it'll differ, but I know where one or two of our people have done that. It has created issues for them because they hadn't really thought about it, if I'm perfectly honest. So that's the end of the legal issues. We'll move on, hopefully, to organisational issues. So, and as I say, this is observational rather than based upon expertise, but some of it reflects what we've seen in our own organisation and with clients. So my first question is whether this is a temporary phenomenon or a permanent shift. And actually, I think the jury is completely out on this at the moment. It's interesting, and one of the reasons for doing the poll is to ask all of you what has happened to this point. It'd be interesting to redo that, wouldn't it, in 12 months' time, if we get back together again to see whether things have drifted back. I think 12 months ago, everybody was talking about the new normal, remote working, the demise of the office, and the demise of apparently of pret-a-manger as well. But I think over time, we're seeing a bit of a drift back, and there's almost a generational divide there, and it's not straightforward from what I've seen. So to give an example, we've got a number of clients where very junior people want to be in the office more than you would expect because they feel the need for that support, for that collegiality, to be around people who know more than they do. And somehow that doesn't work quite as well on Zoom. It seems more formal than just sticking your head over somebody's workstation and saying, can I just have a chat? We've seen middle ranking people, the sort of engine room of the business, if you like, actually have gone through a really challenging time during lockdown where they've had kids at home. They're tending to work remotely more because they've got used to doing that. And it allows them greater involvement in their kids' lives. They tend to log on once the kids have gone to school. They're saving on the commuting time, which has been where the extra productivity or the extra hours has come from. And then more senior people, so who are in a frankly privileged position in our business, have got the space and the absence of kids. And some of us are working remotely most of the time, and some people are going in every day because that's what they're used to and they want to get back to normal. Now, you'll have all seen comments in the press and in the professional press as well about organizations wanting to push to get everybody back in the office. And there is an issue there about if you've gone onto a hybrid model that says you may work at home half the time, and senior management, I was talking to somebody on Saturday about this actually, senior management to say, but you must come in every day. Suddenly, organizationally, we're doing something which our contracts say we shouldn't be doing. And we're trying to impose an obligation on people which legally does not exist. So we have to be careful in the longer term about whether that becomes an issue around bullying. Frankly, if your boss is banging the table saying you must be in every day and your contract says otherwise, that's a difficult issue. So I say, is it permanent? Is it a temporary phenomenon? I don't know. And I don't think anybody does. Anybody who professes to know the absolute answer to that question, I think should be buying lottery tickets at this point in the week. The second question I think is more interesting, it's really a legal question. Is either side obliged to introduce hybrid working or to work on a hybrid basis? Well, the answer is no. It's not a legal requirement. There's a legal requirement to consider flexible working, and there are legitimate reasons why you can decline to do that. But is either side obliged to do it? No, I don't think they are at all. What we are seeing is questions being asked about whether it works for all stakeholders, so employees, the business, and customers. And I don't know what your experience is on this. It would be interesting to talk more about this, and please drop comments into the chat if you'd like. Whether it works for all stakeholders. Clearly, there are some businesses, some organizations, white collar professional services type firms for whom I think it can work perfectly well for everybody, because the nature of the business does not require people being in a particular site building things. So it doesn't matter, the clients are only interested in getting the advice and service that they need. I think for other businesses, patently hybrid working won't work for everybody because not everybody can do it. Now, I've got clients in automotive manufacturing. You cannot bolt cars or diggers together unless you're in the factory. It just conceptually, it just doesn't work, does it? I mean, it's obvious to all of us. But the issue then is whether the fact that it doesn't work for the people making the things is a reason not to do it for the people who could work remotely. And that's where the organizational challenge is starting to appear, because for the, if you like, using historic, rather outdated terms, whilst the blue collar people might not be able to do it, the people who need hands-on machines and bricks and pieces of kit, professional, the support side of the business, administrative, accounting, legal, whatever it happens to be, can do that perfectly effectively. And do we go back to a sort of 1950s, 1960s model of, well, it's all right for them, the white collar people, the staff as they used to be called, rather than for the works people. So the question of, does it work for stakeholders? Yes, possibly. Can it work for the entire business? Yes, possibly, but equally it can be the source of some degree of division and resentment. Hence the example I mentioned of teachers. And there are lots of other organisations where it doesn't work as well. Just as an aside, I've got a client who, by their own admission, has been very slow to the party in relation to flexible working. In fact, their idea of flexible working is you don't work here anymore. So they've been very fixed. They have shut down in a very old-fashioned way their continued manufacturing process. There's no part-time working. There's no working, or historically no remote working. And there was a massive culture of presenteeism at all levels. You're expected to be in the office all day, every day. And what they've found, or they've had to realise and have to accept and now accommodate, is that the world around them has changed. Now, they've managed to resist it for a long time, but what they found, having had the admin side of the business run remotely for some months in 2020, and it worked perfectly well, is that the staff are not prepared to go back to the old ways. And this has affected two things. It's affected retention and recruitment. And I know from talking to others that the recruitment issue, that now getting routinely asked by recruitment agencies offering candidates, or where they've been appointed to find candidates, okay, so what's the hybrid working model? What's the remote working arrangement? How much flexibility is there? So they've had to introduce it. And this is a really live issue. We see it, we're recruiting quite aggressively at the moment, as most organisations seem to be. And it's a massive issue, and people who aren't prepared to be flexible and operate on a hybrid level are losing good candidates as a result. And again, that ties in with location issues, remuneration issues, but people have an expectation, I think, at this point, of some degree of flexibility in working arrangements, whether you call it hybrid or anything else. The last issue I just want to mention is this. The key issue, I think, in making it work, this seems to be coming through in some very early research, is the need for managers to change in the way they manage. It's not the same as managing people in the office, but most of you know that because you've had to do this the last 18 months, 2 years, when people were working remotely to some degree. And the question is, do managers then need more support to be able to do their job? And the survey I mentioned that was published in the Times about 10 days ago does seem to support that. In the survey of 1,200 companies there, they were saying that something like 60% of managers who's responded were saying life was more difficult. They needed more support. It was more difficult to create that collegiate supportive environment, to embed new people, and generally to be quite as coordinated. Not impossible, but they needed to do things differently and needed more support in doing it. So if we could move on, to the next slide. There are a couple of slides here, which, as Tim says, will circulate afterwards, for which I claim no credit at all. They're taken from a presentation by an occupational psychologist called Henry Rose Lee. What, based on some survey work she's done, creates a successful hybrid working environment. And there are these points. And I think actually, given what we've talked about so far, and these will come as no surprise. So what needs to be the key characteristics? One of is focus. So what is it that we do in the office? What do we do working from home? Is there a difference? Can we identify things that can be better done in the office and can better, or easily at least, be done working from home, so that people aren't drifting into the office purely for the sake of it? And there's quite a lot of research, as I'll come on to in a minute, about what it is that organisations need to do to get people into the office, and what's the draw, what's the incentive, apart from come into the office, I need to see you. Organisations where it's working well have good communications, which are regular, brief, concise and clear, so people know exactly what's going on. Communications need to be done differently with people not being in the office. I know lots of people say, well, even when we're in the office, the only stuff we hear from, senior management is by email anyway. So what difference does it make? And we found it makes quite a lot of difference, actually, because there isn't the opportunity for senior and middle managers to clarify the message if they're not actually with people. So the quality of the comms needs to be better. Managers need to have a bit more emotional intelligence. Now, I realize a lawyer talking about emotional intelligence is the most crass thing you can possibly imagine. But what I mean is you've got to pick up on the prompts and the behavioral changes with people. My experience was that we had a couple of people in our team, we still do, they're great, who were living on their own at the start of lockdown, and they really struggled. One of them didn't see another person for 8 weeks, not to talk to, not in real life. And that was difficult. I mean, they're quite self-contained at the best of times, but that was taking it too so far. So you've got to be more aware and react accordingly. Changes in behavior, mood, those things, people not cueing behaviors quite in the way that they were. I think these other points, delegation, planning, trust and problem solving, delegation there is an art and a science to it. You've got to be clear about it. It's a different working arrangement. So what you did before might have worked really well, but you need to delegate and be clear about how delegation is going to work. And the same in relation to planning and prioritizing and being flexible. But it's only about adapting to the circumstances. And all of you and your businesses have been through many cycles of change over the years and have learned to adapt. This is the same. That's why I say it's not fundamentally different, but you just have to be aware that some change is needed. You do need to trust people, and you do need to resolve problems as you go along. Otherwise, they will pile up. Simply expecting people to manage and do things that they have before won't work in the modern world. This is a piece of external independent research carried out by Leesman. It's a sort of quasi-academic exercise. I don't know what the sample size was. It was done at the end of last year, so it may now be quite different. And this was, what is it that people value about coming into the office? And part of the premise here is why? What's the point of coming into the office? It takes me an hour each way on the train, stroke car, stroke bus. It's a complete waste of time. I'm crammed into a space with people, or I'm stuck in traffic. I could be working or I could be doing something else. So why bother? And this piece of research is on the why bother, what draws people to do that. And the results are interesting. I don't think they're utterly conclusive. And there are other pieces of research which support this to a degree or come to slightly different conclusions. There was a piece done by, I think, the former HRD of Facebook on this as well, that they're a slightly different organization. So the biggest draw is people coming to see people and socialize. That doesn't mean they're going to the pub or going out for lunch. It's just being around colleagues. It's a different interaction, dealing with live people in the same space. The second thing I think is interesting, learning and development. Learning and development is valued done in person as opposed to done like this, which is a pity because it would be better if we were doing it live in the same room, obviously. But learning is seen as developmental. Also, being with people, picking up on other people's expertise, observing how more experienced colleagues do things which appear intolerably difficult. In fact, they seem to breeze through. Is learning at other people's knee, as I've said before, slightly old-fashioned concept, but still valid. Hosting, this was about meeting clients, plainly better done if you see them than trying to deal with them over Zoom. Although interestingly, what we've seen, and it may be that our sector is different to some degree, the number of actual face-to-face client meetings we were having has declined over time anyway, for two reasons. One is clients don't want to spend the time traveling to our offices necessarily, and they don't want to pay for us because it's expensive to travel to their offices. So people have got more into the habit of doing things over the phone and by email. And the advent of Zoom and Teams and things like that, I think has just accelerated that process. I can't think of anybody in the last 6 months who said to me, I absolutely must see you face to face about this, because on Zoom we can have an almost as effective conversation as we can if we're in the same room. Now, these last two, I'll just pick on these two. I've seen a lot of comment, particularly from senior managers in the finance sector saying, no, we must have people in the office because they must be in the same place collaborating on jolly difficult things and complex issues. You can't brainstorm in the same way. And actually, that's not what people value. They don't see that as big a draw as talking to their mates or learning and developing. Now, whether that's wholly true in every environment, I don't know. There'll be some sectors certainly where it'd be much better. For instance, if people were, obviously out on site going, this is what we're going to need to do here, because everybody's seeing it in the same way. So I offer that up. It's an example of some of the research that's going on out there. Whether it's wholly conclusive, whether it's right, I don't actually know. So finally, just to conclude before we go on to some questions, the key points to take away from all of this, mine would be these four. The first one, from a legalistic point of view, is about clarity of expectation. This is about the contract piece and all that goes with it. What do we want you to do? When do we want you to do it? How is it to be delivered? Because if we don't have that clarity, that will create a dispute. At some point, there's a mismatch. How do we measure contribution and delivery? Is it the same or is it different? Well, I don't think it matters whether it's different or the same, provided everybody understands what it is. So does it matter if I choose to work on a super hybrid basis where I start at lunchtime and finish at midnight, or am I to work 8 till 6 or whatever it happens to be? There is quite a lot of evidence around that for people to see the value of coming into the office, it has to be worth it. There has to be some upside to that. Some people have talked about making it an event. Well, frankly, life is not an event every day, is it? And we can't work on that basis. That's, it looks like every day is Disneyland. The real world is not like that. But they've got to perceive a value because there is an inconvenience to that. I think hopefully we're getting past the point where people see the issue of coming into the office as the risk of infection in transit on public transport. There's certainly been a lot of that, and you all know that there is some law around that. But the value to it, because it is dislocating and disruptive. And the last one is that from a managerial and leadership point of view, hybrid working does require a different approach. It may not be massively different, but people need to accept they may need to do things differently. So at that point, I will stop talking, and I think it'll allow Tim to resume control, and then we can deal with questions. I can't actually see whether there are any, but let's hope that there are.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you for that. And it's just fascinating listening to you about, all these sorts of issues. I'm sure people can see that sort of chime with what their experiences are and can take their experiences and apply them as well. So that's really helpful. So thank you very much for that. I do have so if we move on to the sort of question and answer session. If you have any questions, please fill them in now, and we'll see what we can do. What we'll try and do is, if we run out of time, because we've got a hard stop at 11 o'clock, so if we run out of time for any questions, we will answer them and send them out afterwards anyway. So as I said, do feel free to answer some. I've got one here. You mentioned, Martin, about anchor days. Could you expand on that a little bit more? I don't think I've heard that phrase myself before.
Okay, it's not a particular term of art, and it's certainly not anything with a specific legal meaning. Where I've seen it used is that people are saying, well, it would be good to have everybody in together where we know they're all going to be in on the same day. So we'll call that, the terminology is, that's the anchor day for the week, the one that everybody's tied to be in the office on. In our model, we're operating on a sort of 50% in the office. So one of those, 20% of that 50% is going to be on a Thursday. Some parts of our business have gone for 2 anchor days a week as a minimum, and we've operated a quite devolved model. So each team can do what suits it best or what suits its people best. Some teams are going for 3 days in the office by sort of discussion and agreement, and it's the same 3 days, and then they have 2 days at the beginning and end of the week where they're working remotely. So it's just a term, but that's what I mean by it. Yeah.
Okay, lots more popped up. Alison, actually, thanks for the question. We have deliberately not changed contracts of employment yet, so the location still stays says head office despite the working from home. Should we change that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In a perfect world, you would change it to identifying that it's a hybrid working model with time to be spent in the office and working from home. That there are issues, and I don't think we've got time to explain them all now, where you all know that if people, if you're office based, then traveling into the office is traveling to work for which you can't be paid, can't be recompensed travel expenses. If you're home working entirely, then a requirement to come in for the odd day and associated travel costs, there are circumstances in which that can be a reimbursable expense. The hybrid model creates lots of problems because it's both. So it would depend how often you were coming into the office, because if you were, it was a 50-50 split, but in fact you were coming in every day and being paid for your traveling on the 2 days that you wouldn't, 2.5 days you wouldn't otherwise be coming in, that could become a taxable benefit. So I think clarity, my preference is for clarity in everything. So at some point I would suggest you should move towards that. It may be too early at this stage, providing you've got some degree of evidence about what the nature of the hybrid working was, how long it was going to last, when it was going to be reviewed, and that can be evidence in email. The tribunals would definitely accept that. They can see what's going on, and they can see, what the nature of the commitment was. So having something in writing doesn't necessarily need to be in the contract, I don't think.
Okay, thank you, Martin. A couple of quick questions, actually. There's one about the graph here, the graph we put up, the hosting. Is that sort of mean hosting meetings and chairing meetings? Yes.
Yes, that's really what that was about. It's about, there are some things that do work better if everybody's in the room and people valued that, but as I say, they didn't value it as much as seeing their colleagues, which it is what it is. It's a snapshot rather than a definitive analysis of behavioural traits.
Okay, another quick one, because I'm going to try and get through as many as we can. Where we have staff working from home, do we have a legal obligation to pat test any equipment they use? So is there a legal obligation for that?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I will take that one away because I honestly don't know, because I'm an employment lawyer.
No.
Suspect the answer is probably yes, but I'll qualify that by saying probably, and I'll check.
No, thank you, and we'll put the answers afterwards for everyone who's registered. We're getting more and more pushback for people to work from abroad. Are there any ways of making this easier within legal frameworks? We have a default people can work overseas for 4 weeks, but have already lost one person because we couldn't say yes for longer, for 6 months.
I think part of that would depend on why. Certainly, there's no obligation to let people as a default work from abroad, because it can create problems for the business in compliance terms, as I mentioned. But that won't be a uniform answer in every sector all of the time. It may come down to the question of why is, if somebody puts in a flexible working request, because that's effectively what they're looking to do, as to, there are legitimate grounds for saying no. If, for instance, at its most extreme, somebody says, I'm going to go and live in New Zealand. I think we talked about this the other day. I'm going to go and live in New Zealand. That's fine, isn't it? And you go, no, because it means you're working when everybody else is asleep. Now, so as a starting point, that may justify saying no. Equally, if their role doesn't require real-time interaction, what difference does it make? Provided that all of the other things fall into place. And we were talking with one of our team last year, before all of this started, 2 years ago now, before all of this started, about relocating and working from Medellin in Colombia, which is 4-hour time difference. And we worked through it because initially our reaction was to say, can't see that working. There'll be all sorts of problems. In fact, all the problems we thought there would be about compliance and insurance and our regulator, not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. And it would have been, it hasn't happened, but it would have been advantageous because we would have had cover for 4 hours later in the working day. We do a lot of work with North American clients, being partly Canadian, and it would have provided us with one of our lawyers who was working in their time zone, or certainly East Coast time zone.
So it actually worked out. Yes. Yeah.
Where it would have worked out very well, and where we expected there to be problems, there weren't any. And there were problems elsewhere, but that's a different story for another day.
Well, I think I'm sorry that we haven't got all the questions. We've reached 11 o'clock, so I just need to sort of say, first of all, thank you very much, Martin, for today. And we could probably speak for hours about this. I've got up there, we've got a couple more webinars actually in the next couple of weeks in March around total award and obviously recruitment retention issues, and also wellbeing strategy as well. So if you're not registered for those, please do so. As I said, we'll send out the slides for today. Obviously, it's great that Martin's been able to join us, and obviously great that Gowling are the official legal advisors for Birmingham as well, put up there. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you found it useful. And as I said, we'll send out some more the answers to the questions, and we hope to see you again next time. So in the meantime, thanks again for joining. Stay safe and see you next time. So thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye now then.